Good morning. I hope you're doing well. I hope that you're ready for a great week. It's going to be an amazing week for us here at Liberty University. First of all, this morning, obviously, we have Dinesh D'Souza with us. Dinesh will be speaking for about 25 minutes, and then we'll open up for a conversation, Q&A style. We have a microphone in this aisle and a microphone on the other side in both aisles. We ask that you actually have questions and not like comments, and thoughts, but just actually bring a question as it pertains to the documentary and the book, Death of a Nation. And so President Falwell will be just sitting and just helping host the Q&A time. And so this is not a time to ask about when is my dorm going to be ready next semester or anything like that. This is a time for you to ask questions that are pointed towards the conversation that we're having on this particular topic. On Wednesday, we'll have Ed Young, Jr. from Fellowship Church with us in the morning and in the evening. We're doing a one-day revival. We're pausing the 7 series until after we come back from Thanksgiving break to finish that out. It's going to be a great Wednesday for us. So buckle up. It's going to be one of those weeks that God, I think, is going to do great things to us. Let me pray for us, and then President Falwell will come out and introduce our keynote guest. Father, we thank you for this opportunity that you've given us. We thank you, Lord, for just conversation. Thank you that we get to live in a nation where through civil conversation, we can learn from one another. We can be stretched, God. And we pray that today, that in all that we talk about, all that we learn, that God, we find ourselves on one team, wanting to see this nation better. Lord, we know that the hope for this nation is ultimately awakening and revival. And so we pray that for this nation. We pray that you would be in the center of this country, God. We love you. We thank you for this opportunity. Amen. Amen. Hey, can we put our hands together for our president, President Falwell?
Thank you, David. Welcome. I always try to be involved when Dinesh D'Souza visits Liberty because he and I go way back. He was at Dartmouth when I was at Liberty, and he invited my father. He was part of, I don't know if it was the Dartmouth Review, invited my father up to speak, and actually the first book he wrote was about my father. It was called Falwell Before the Millennium, I believe it was. And he's now written 15 plus books, many of them New York Times bestsellers. He's won numerous awards, including Best Documentary for America. The name of the documentary was America, Imagine the World Without Her. He is considered one of the top young public policy makers in the country and one of the nation's 500 leading authorities on international issues. His articles have appeared in virtually every major magazine and newspaper, including The Atlantic, Vanity Fair, Forbes, and he's appeared on numerous television programs from the liberal side, Bill Maher, to Sean Hannity on the conservative side, Today Show, Nightline. Please welcome back to Liberty University, Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you. Hey guys, I'm thrilled and excited to be back at Liberty. Did you enjoy watching the movie? Yeah. Awesome. Well, we are at a very critical time, and it's a time where we need more civility, but it's a time, most of all, where we need more truth. I want to talk not so much about fake news, which we hear a lot about. In fact, I just saw on social media that one of the Kavanaugh accusers has now admitted that she made the whole thing up. Fake news. What she was trying to do is corroborate Susan Ford's accusation, and she was manufacturing events. She never met Kavanaugh. Fake news. And the reason fake news works is because there's a complicit media to promulgate the accusation and not investigate it. But I want to talk about something deeper, more profoundly disturbing in a university context, which is fake scholarship, fake history, fake narratives. Now, to the ordinary person, this may seem a little bit suspicious. How does a fake narrative get made? Are you alleging some sort of conspiracy, Dinesh? No. But what I am saying is that much of what we consider to be history is progressive history. In other words, it's history with a spin. I'll give a couple of examples of it before jumping to our discussion and questions. When people say things like Trump is a fascist, or fascism is, the conservatives are the party of fascism, that claim relies upon a deeper scholarly claim, which is that fascism is a phenomenon of the right. Fascism is right-wing. Now, I learned that in college. And this notion that fascism is right-wing long predates Trump. It was actually concocted right after World War II. So what I'm trying to get at is this: the progressives who are coming to power in the 50s and 60s in academia and the media and Hollywood, they are the ones who have told us the history that we know. When I speak on campus, I frequently confront students and professors who know things that aren't true. And I think to myself, how do you get to know something that isn't true? Well, here's how that happens. A professor, let's just say at Tulane University, on the left, writes a book, Fascism is on the Right. His colleagues, who are like-minded, say, greatest book ever published, settles the debate. Pretty soon, the New York Review of Books writes a review. Brilliant expose, fascism is on the right. NPR interviews the guy. Pretty soon, Michael Moore comes rolling in to do a documentary. And then it's on Wikipedia. So for the ordinary guy now, who wasn't around during fascism, you go, wow, yeah, fascism has to be on the right. Why? Because I was in Barnes & Noble, I thought I saw it over there, I turned on NPR in my car and I heard it, and then I went on the History Channel and boom, there it was, and I type it in Wikipedia, so that's how I know it. Because you have all these corroborating sources. And what the person who says that doesn't realize is that it's the same bullet ricocheting from one wall to another, but because it's coming at you from different directions, you think there's the corroboration. That's why it must be true. It must be true. Now, let's examine this very issue a little bit further to see if it is true. First of all, the reason that fascism got started is because of something called the crisis of Marxism. Marxism predicted in the 19th century that there would be clashes between the proletariat, the working class, and the business class, the bourgeoisie, and you would see communist revolutions breaking out all over Europe. And this did not happen. It's not happened in Europe. It hasn't happened anywhere in the world to this date. So when the 20th century came along, smart people who were in the Marxist camp realized this Marxist prophecy is false. What's wrong with it? Why aren't these revolutions happening? One of those Marxists was Benito Mussolini, the founder of fascism. And Mussolini basically figured out that the reason that Marx's prediction wasn't working is that working people are less attached to their class, the working class, than they are to their country. Mussolini saw in World War I that the French socialists fought for France, and the German socialists fought for Germany, and the British socialists fought for Britain. And so Mussolini realized, I need to reinvent Marxism and socialism. What I need to do is replace class with nationhood, with nationalism. I need to marry nationalism with socialism, and that's where we get National Socialism. So you see ideologically how fascism, National Socialism, came from the left. It came out of the Marxist movement. And in fact, I list this in my book, Death of a Nation, all the leading founders of fascism in 5 countries, from Belgium to France, to Britain, to Italy, to Germany, were without exception men of the left. One of the founders of French socialism was Jean Alemán. He was considered the grand old man of French socialism. Then there was Marcel Dié, who was a lifelong socialist, Jacques Doriot, who was a communist. These are the founders of fascism from the left. Hitler's party, we all know, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So this is indisputably in the historical record. No one even dreams of refuting it. There it is. But you won't find it in textbooks. You don't find it in the History Channel, and I'm going to get to why. Now, if you watch Death of a Nation, there's a scene in that movie where you see a group of leading Nazis. This is 1935. They're making the Nuremberg laws, which turn Jews into second-class citizens. And they want to segregate Jews into ghettos. They want state-sponsored discrimination, and they want to outlaw intermarriage between Jews and other Germans. And they're sitting around a room, and they have in their hands the Democratic Party laws of the Jim Crow South. And they are using the Democratic Party laws as a model for their laws. Basically, they're crossing out the word black and writing in the word Jew. This fact that the Nazis didn't just develop parallel laws, but they actually got the scheme for the Nuremberg laws from the Democrats. The US Democratic Party, this to my knowledge, has never appeared in any high school or college textbook. It is a fact erased from history. But there it is, incontestable in the historical record. Where did I get it? I got it from the Yale legal scholar James Whitman and his book, Hitler's American Model. Hitler's American Model. Whitman has the transcripts of these meetings. All the top Nazis were there. And the remarkable thing is, as Whitman describes it, he knows that the Nazis got it from the Democrats, but being on the left, he wants to hide that fact. So what does he do? Notice the title of his book. Not Hitler's Democratic Model, which would have been more accurate, but Hitler's American Model. So Whitman decides, why don't I blame it on America? That way, it fulfills the left-wing objective of blaming the country and not the actual people who passed those laws. See, here's the thing that Whitman leaves out. Every segregation law in the American South from the 1880s to the 1950s was passed by a Democratic legislature, signed by a Democratic governor, and enforced by Democratic officials. And there is no exception to this rule. So these weren't American laws, they were Democratic laws. So what we have here, and this is what my work has tried to expose, is that progressive history is about covering up the crimes of progressivism and the Democratic Party, hiding them. And that's why, for example, this Nuremberg meeting, you'd think if we're going to learn about fascism, the great crime of the 20th century, you'd know that it had a link to America, a direct link, but that is being hidden. And because it's hidden, that's why Antifa thugs can roam our campuses and cities and think that they're fighting fascism. Even though they dress like brown shirts and black shirts, they carry truncheons, they beat people up, they use fascist tactics, but they can pose as anti-fascists because of the big lie that fascism is on the right. It never was, but the lie was manufactured by very smart people who came to power in academia and the media and Hollywood, and they knew that fascism was on the left. They knew that FDR was an admirer of Mussolini. Mussolini was an admirer of FDR. The Nazi newspapers were praising the New Deal. All facts left out of the record. They knew this. But they said that now that American troops have gone into the concentration camps and found those starving, emaciated figures and pulled them out, now that fascism and Nazism have been exposed to the world as the very epitome of human evil, if the facts get out, we're finished. If the facts get out, the Democratic Party is done. The Democratic Party will have to go the way of the Whigs. So what we have to do now is cover that up. Put it under the carpet. Not lie, just leave it out. Or like Whitman, don't blame the Democratic Party, blame America. So what's going on here is that a big lie, fake scholarship, fake history. Now I want to pivot to the issue of race, which I've touched upon, because that's the second area of the big lie. As you know, over the past couple of years, lots of people rampaging through the South, pulling down Confederate monuments, down with Robert E. Lee. Now Robert E. Lee opposed slavery. Robert E. Lee opposed secession. Robert E. Lee fought for the South because he knew that the war was going to come to his home state of Virginia. He was essentially a state patriot. You can agree with him or disagree with him on that. But the fact is, he's not the bad guy of slavery, as Abraham Lincoln knew full well. If Abraham Lincoln thought he was, would he have offered him the supreme command of the Union Army? No. Abraham Lincoln named the 4 bad guys of slavery. And notice that this is not something that is in the textbook either. Lincoln named them. Number one, Roger Taney, the author of the Dred Scott decision, from Maryland. Lincoln counts that as the South. Franklin Pierce, the former president, from New Hampshire, Northern Democrat. James Buchanan, the sitting president, from Pennsylvania, Northern Democrat. Stephen Douglas from Illinois, Northern Democrat. So 3 of the 4 are Northern Democrats. But notice that the progressives today aren't pulling down. Stephen Douglas has a big statue in Chicago. No one's touched it. No Antifa raids, no Black Lives Matter. Why? Because if you pull down Stephen Douglas's statue, you're blowing the whistle on the fact that the real criminals of slavery wasn't the South. It was actually the Northern Democrats in league with the Southern Democrats. They were in it together. To hide this fact, you have to pick a third man, Robert E. Lee, and pin the blame on him. It's an effort to move the blame for slavery from the Democratic Party, where it belongs, onto the South. This is a big lie. Abraham Lincoln was a liberal. Another big lie. Abraham Lincoln never in his life called himself a liberal. He's certainly not a progressive. That term came into currency later. What Lincoln did call himself was a conservative, and he did it repeatedly. Read his speeches. At one point, Lincoln's brother asked him for a loan. Lincoln goes, "Not happening." He goes, "The reason you want a loan is you're too lazy to work." Lincoln goes, "Go get a job. Get paid $20 a month, and I know you're going to think it's not enough. So, okay, you go get to work, you get $20 a month, and for every $20 a month that you earn, I'll give you another 20, and that's going to show you the value of work so you don't get into debt again." Does this sound like a liberal? By the way, Lincoln's not raiding the state to do this. He's giving money out of his own funds. So Lincoln was through and through a conservative. And we see this more profoundly if we look at Lincoln's philosophy. Lincoln says that the essence of slavery is this: you work, I eat. That's the meaning of slavery according to Lincoln. And Lincoln says this notion, notice that for Lincoln, slavery isn't just racial, it's theft. One guy works, another guy appropriates his labor. And for Lincoln, this is the credo of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is based on theft. And Lincoln says, now here's what we Republicans stand for. The hand that makes the corn has the right to put the corn into its own mouth. In other words, people have a right to keep the fruit of their own labor. Now think about it. This is said over 150 years ago. And yet I submit it is no less true today. What is the basic idea of the Republican Party? People get to keep their stuff. Keep the fruits of your own labor. What's the basic idea of the Democratic Party? You work, I eat. One guy works, the Democrats appropriate the fruits of your labor, they decide to do with it as they see fit. So for all the people who think the parties changed, I submit that the core principles of the two parties in 1860 are virtually identical with what they are today. Obviously there has been change, but history shows continuities no less than discontinuities, and we should be alert to both. Now, did the parties switch sides courtesy of Richard Nixon's cunning Southern strategy? The short answer is no. Richard Nixon did not have this Southern strategy, and the proof of it is that when Nixon was elected, the first thing he did, one of his first policies, affirmative action. Nixon invented affirmative action. And what is affirmative action? Legal preferences for minorities over whites. So think about this. Does it make any sense that a guy who's supposedly wooing the Deep South, trying to win the Southern racist Democrats over to the Republican Party, does it make any sense that that guy, the first thing he does when he comes in, legal preferences for blacks over whites? That makes no sense. That fact alone should raise your antenna, your suspicions that that is not what was going on at all. You have another case of revisionist historiography. Now, the beauty of living today is that the stuff I say is not Dinesh's history versus some other guy's history. You can check, you can verify. And so when I say things like the racist Democrats, the Dixiecrats, never became Republicans, there's a way to find out. Your phone. Call them up. As you know in the movie, I put them up on the screen. I name them. In the House, in the Senate, 150 guys, roughly. A big number. And then I count how many of the racist Dixiecrats became Republicans. In the House, one guy, Albert Watson. In the Senate, one guy, Strom Thurmond. And all the other racists stayed and lived and died in the Democratic Party. And our lionize in the Democratic Party. My wife Debbie and I, we're going to Washington, D.C. tomorrow. There are buildings in Washington named after them. So the notion that the racist Democrats became Republicans is a flat-out progressive fiction. But it's a fiction promoted by really smart people who know better, but are willing to lie for their cause. Case in point, the Princeton historian Kevin Cruz constantly keeps saying, Dinesh, you're wrong. The racist Dixiecrats did become Republicans. What about Jesse Helms? What about Trent Lott? What about John Tower? The what about doesn't really work because none of those guys were racist Dixiecrats. They weren't Dixiecrats at all. The definition of a Dixiecrat is either somebody who joined the Dixiecrat Party in the 40s, or somebody who voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's the conventional measure that historians use to count who is a Dixiecrat. Now, Kevin Cruz knows this. He knows that Helms was not a Dixiecrat. But he also is counting, it's called the argumentum ad ignorantium. It's the argument that relies on the ignorance of the audience. He doesn't think his students know. And this is why when I said to Cruz, listen, why don't we debate it? I'll come to Princeton University, your home campus. We'll debate in front of your own students. You'll have a hospitable crowd. Last I saw, the guy was hiding under his desk. He doesn't dare. And he doesn't dare for one simple reason. He doesn't dare because he doesn't need to. It's not just that he's a coward, he is. But he doesn't dare because he doesn't need to. He knows he has a monopoly over his students. He knows he's in a position to bully them. He knows that there's a risk that if I come on, this is the same risk that, say, Rachel Maddow would take if she put me on about fascism. This woman bloviates about fascism every day. But she won't have me on for 90 seconds because that's all it would take to expose her as a complete fraud, to show that she knows nothing about fascism at all. She doesn't even know the definition of it. Or if she does, she's not letting on. Because the definition of fascism is really clear. State control over the organs of business and state control over the lives of citizens. That is the actual clinical meaning of fascism. As Mussolini put it, everything in the state, nothing against the state, nothing outside the state. Now, there's one more principle I want to talk about briefly before going to questions, and that is the concept of Gleichschaltung. Gleichschaltung is coordination, bringing the whole society into lockstep with the priorities of the Nazi Party. When I was in Nuremberg and Munich shooting the movie, I noticed that people are flying swastika flags. This is footage of Nazi Germany flying swastika flags off their balcony, doing the Heil Hitler salute. And I thought to myself, how interesting. Why are you doing the Heil Hitler salute? Hitler's not here. What are you doing? What are you signaling? And then it occurred to me, the people who did that were not signaling, we are devoted, committed believers in the Nazi ideology. No, they were signaling, we are cowardly worms who are willing to do whatever the Nazis tell us to do. You want us to go start a war, kill Jews? We're ready. Because we are such wimps that we do not dare to go against the state, to go against Nazi ideology. Now, this is what the left is attempting in America. Not just control of our behavior, but control of our minds. This is the reason, by the way, look, they have academia, most of it. They have the media, most of it. They have Hollywood, all of it. You think that'd be enough? No, they want the NFL. Bunch of guys running with the ball. They want those guys. They want the Boy Scouts, and they got them. They want the Christian baker. Let's force him to bake a cake. And if he goes to the Supreme Court and he wins, let's sue him again. Let's destroy his life. Why? Not just because we're mean people, we are, but let's destroy his life so everybody else can see what we did to him, so they will be scared. They won't dare not to bake a cake. Ultimately, they will give in. They will become the cowardly worms we want them to become. They will fly the swastika flag off their balcony. And so my message to you ultimately here is not just about truth, it's also about courage, to stand up against this nonsense, not to put up with any of it, to recognize that this is an effort to beat you into being a worm, an intellectual worm whose thoughts are controlled. Don't give in to it. Ultimately, be Socratic, be independent, be willing to stand up for your beliefs, check things out, verify them for yourself. At the end of the day, liberate your mind. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to sit up here to moderate in case Dinesh gets out of control. But no, he's so brave to say the things he just said. He's really the first. He was really the first person who was politically prosecuted by the Obama administration, and it was for a minor infraction. He was pardoned by President Trump. He put on Twitter the other day, I just voted. Felons can't vote, but pardoned felons can. And so I think he had given a little bit too much money to some candidate, and so the Obama Justice Department went after him. But that was the first one of all kinds of shenanigans that we saw later with James Comey and the Department of Justice. And so he's paid for for exposing, for shining light on these revisionist historians, and they permeate all our schools, our colleges, and I just admire him for taking a stand. Give him a hand if you would. All right, you guys look like a smart group. Who's got the first question? Yes.
Hi, my name's Malcolm. I have a friend, her name's Christine, and she says, for Dinesh, how do you think we can reverse the progressive movement? How do we overcome this movement to silence conservatives?
So conservatives are doing pretty well. We'll find out more tomorrow, but in the political arena. But the political arena is part of a larger battlefield, if I can use that term. That larger battlefield is dominated by the left. They have the three big megaphones of our culture: academia, Hollywood, and the media. So the bottom line of it is you counter them by building institutions in those areas. We have been doing documentary films, and that's a shift in my career. But at the end of the day, we have to do feature films because that's the gold standard of Hollywood. I'd like to see young people start a comedy channel, which is a chance to cultivate young comedians. The left dominates these comedians. Look, Bill Maher, Jon Stewart, Rosie, you go down the line you go, and these guys flay us and flay Trump on every medium, every second of every day. And now they use the Emmys and the Oscars to do it. So bottom line of it is, we have to figure out how to break their monopoly in these institutions. And ultimately, it'll happen generationally. It's going to take time, but it's a good time to start.
She says good info.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Opal. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for all of your work. It's really important to us. And my question is concerning that work, and I know you use different medias a lot. So you do documentaries and speeches like this and more in-depth books, but then you also have, Twitter and like quick little things. And it's been really interesting for me as I'm studying government and English together to look at how the left uses rhetoric. They're very good at it. They're very good at they're good at making signs and good mottos and quick little things. And oftentimes I find myself using just paragraphs to explain one thing. And I feel that conservatives tend to think a lot more through things and that it takes more words for us to do so. How aligned do you think our rhetoric needs to be with the market of Twitter and of Facebook? How 30-second clips should we be? How do we balance that as conservatives?
The truth of it is we live in a culture that is somewhat ADD, impatient, and so we need to put out our message that way. When I make movies, people say to me things like, conservatives value reason, the other side values emotion. I'm like, no, I value both. I put both into my movies. The key to a good movie is an emotional narrative. I want people in my movies to be inwardly transformed, and that's a function of the head and the heart. Sometimes when people read my Twitter, they think I'm a total slash and burn guy. I'm not. That's my Twitter persona. But if I'm having an apologetics debate, I'm a completely different person. Now, if this seems chameleonic, it's really not. I'm adapting my message to the medium. It's not a different message, but it is a little different tone. And I would say the same with Trump and Reagan. Reagan lived in a different time, and a different tone was appropriate. If Trump appears to be a mud wrestler, it's not because he created all this chaos and division. It created him. Republicans nominated one Boy Scout after another, like Romney, and saw them beaten to a pulp. And finally, they realized the other side has gone gangster on us. Let's kind of have a gangster on our side, if you will. Or at least, let's have a boss. And so I explain Trumpism as a response to the peculiarities of our time. So that's the short answer for you. Try to adapt a message to different mediums so you actually do find the audience. Words, in that sense, are a product like anything else.
Right. Thank you very much.
Hey there, my name's Preston. First of all, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. My question is a bit of a two-parter. I hope that's okay. First of all, do you believe that the racism and fascism depicted in Death of a Nation is consistent across the whole Democratic Party or more among the extremists within the group? And then secondly, what would you say to the Liberty student here who is perhaps left-leaning and feels misrepresented by your film or your book?
With regard to the first question, is the racism and fascism, you may say, typical or representative, or is it anomalous and exceptional? The answer is, this racism and fascism I'm talking about was driven by the leadership of the Democratic Party. So, for example, you can see in the movie that the guy who's in bed with Mussolini, you know, I'm not pointing on, here's W.E.B. Du Bois, eccentric, left-wing African-American. No, here's FDR. Who else represents the Democratic Party for a whole generation if not FDR? FDR sends members of his brain trust to fascist Rome to study Italian fascism to bring those ideas here. This is FDR. So I'm not indicting the small guys. The racism in the Democratic Party was promoted at the very top. And in fact, the Northern Democrats, like Martin Van Buren, would look to Southern plantation models and try to figure out, how do I import those to the North? Some of this is documented not in the movie, but the book. And this is going back to the earlier question, why I'd like to do the 1-2 punch, is the nuance and texture and references are given in the book. And again, they're mainstream historical sources. Look, go read all the reviews of Death of a Nation. You'll find lots of bloviating, angry, dyspeptic, constipated critics, but ask yourself just this question: what are the actual facts, if any, in Dinesh's book or movie that are being refuted? You notice that the movie puts out facts one on top of the other. Now, what do I say to the progressive? Frankly, I say to you, you've been conned. You've been sold a total bill of goods, and you are a sucker. So don't be a sucker. Try to learn. Try to examine your own assumptions. If what I say is true, a lot of what you believe is false. So it's a little bit like the atheist who read the Bible for the first time. He finished reading it, and he wrote at the end of it, important if true. Important if true. That applies to my movie. It's important if true, and it's your job to figure out if what I'm saying is true. And if you find anything that's false, I'm in the public space. I'd like to have it pointed out to me.
Don't you think there are a lot of well-meaning Democrats who've been fooled into thinking that the Democrats really are the party that advocates for the downtrodden and the poor, when really they want to keep those folks poor. They want to keep poor people poor with the welfare system so that they can always get their vote. I mean, is that not true?
Here's how I'd put that. The choice for me between the two parties, and I discovered this as an immigrant coming to America at the age of 17, I had to look wide-eyed at the two parties and decide what do they stand for. To me, there's the party of the ladder and the party of the rope. The ladder is the ladder of opportunity. And one party says, it's your job to climb the ladder. Yes, the government has a role, and that's to protect your rights, but how you succeed is up to you. And how far you get on the ladder is up to your efforts. That's the ladder. The other is the rope. This is the Democratic approach, which is actually very appealing on the first glance. And it's basically this. We Democrats are on top of a building. We're going to let down a rope. You, unfortunate immigrant, hang on to the rope. We'll pull you up. And that's appealing because, frankly, it's easier to hang on to a rope than to climb a ladder. But then you begin to think, and it occurs to you, wait a minute, you know, these guys are holding the rope. If they let go, down I go. And second of all, I notice that lots of people who are pulled up on the rope never get all the way up. They never get to the top of the building. They're hanging in abeyance, and they are in complete dependency on the people holding the rope. And maybe the people holding the rope want it like that, because if this guy ever gets independent, he could dust himself off and take off, and the Democratic Party may never see him again. So I notice that all these communities, and when I talk about the plantation, I'm not talking about the old slave plantation. I'm talking about ghettos for African Americans, barrios like the one my wife Debbie here grew up in, the Native American reservations. Notice that all this money is spent on these people, and they never seem to get out of poverty. And you begin to think that the party that rules with one-party rule, 90% of the votes every single time, wants it that way.
I grew up in the South. My family's from Virginia all the way back to the 1600s. And when I saw your, I guess it was at the premiere in Washington, when I saw your film, at first I thought, well, I felt a little bit embarrassed. I was from the South, but then the more I listened, it was the Democrats in the South, and I started asking some of the older people in my own family. My dad's twin brother still lives in the house where they were born, just on the other side of the mountain here. He's 85. And he said, no, my dad couldn't stand FDR. And so my family were in the South, but they were probably you could put all the Republicans in Lynchburg in a phone booth back in those days, but they were part of that group that would have been in the phone booth. And so I felt better about them. And then when I looked at the pictures, my granddad was a successful businessman in the 20s, and all of his businesses, the nightclub, the hotel, the pictures proved they were all very, very much integrated, even in the 1920s. So it wasn't everybody in the South. It was the Democrats, North and South.
The Yale historian C. Van Woodward has an important book, The Strange Career of Jim Crow. And what's interesting about that book is he says that segregation was not an inevitability. It wasn't an expression of the Southern mind. It wasn't some natural thing that just developed because Southerners are Southerners and they're inherently racist. He goes, no, there was a huge party fight about segregation in which the Republican Party and the companies, the railroads didn't want to segregate. They were fighting segregation. They didn't want to have to build separate compartments for blacks and whites. So it was commerce plus the Republican Party against a unified racist Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party won because the North became exhausted after the Civil War and pulled out. And so essentially the black Republicans were overrun by the racist Democrats. That's how we got segregation in the South. So this party history of America has never been told. And here's the point. Has the Democratic Party, for once, a lot of historians now go, well, the Democratic Party, we all know, used to be the party of slavery and segregation. They don't teach it, but when I say it, they concede it. Then I go, has the Democratic Party ever admitted this? Have they ever acknowledged it? Have they ever apologized for it? Have they ever paid 1 penny of restitution for it? No. Because their game is to blame it on the founders, blame it on America, blame it on the white man, blame it on the South, blame it on everybody except the guys who actually did it.
Yep. And then one thing go ahead. One thing we were talking about backstage before we came out is that it was the King of England who created slavery and brought it to the colonies. And there was slavery here. I think there were 12 million slaves brought from Africa to the New World between 1600 and 1800. And only 500,000 of them came to the American South. So most of them were in South America, the Caribbean, Central America. But it was the people we went to war against in the Revolutionary War for freedom that started slavery. It took us 80 years to get rid of it because so much of America's wealth had been so much of people's wealth had been invested in it, it was almost impossible to end suddenly. But that's something else that's been lost to history, is that it was the same people who were impinging on our freedoms who impinged on the freedoms of African slaves and brought them here as slaves. It created the institution of slavery. Go ahead. Are you done? Okay.
Thank you.
This side. Yep.
Hello, my name is Kendra, and I want to say thank you for being here. I have two questions, actually. So the first one is, in the documentary, there was a part where it said Trump isn't racist, and a lot of people were like cheering about that, and the examples that were used, it was just, Trump saying, I don't care if you're, black or white. And then he was also talking about Muslims can come here. So why is it so like that people automatically take his word for it, even though his supporters are, well, not his supporters, but he has been endorsed by like people who have been in the KKK?
Very good question, and kind of a bombshell question because it gets to the heart of the matter. Now, to me, the most crushing fact in the movie is toward the very end, and there's more about this in the book, by the way. I asked the question that has been taken for granted since Charlottesville, that the Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis, the white nationalists are all on Trump's side. I ask, what's the proof of this? Has anyone ever done a survey of Klansmen, neo-Nazis, white nationalists? Answer no. None. All you have are the images from Charlottesville of white nationalists with Trump hats. That's it. That's the evidence right there. So what I said is, I'm going to check out those guys one by one, and I do. And in the book, I show that without exception, all the leading white nationalists, not just Jason Kessler, who organized the Charlottesville rally, by the way, an Obama activist, an Occupy Wall Street guy, not just the guy who runs the neo-Nazi websites, another left-winger who's come out of the environmental movement and the population control movement, but Richard Spencer, the poster boy of white nationalism. And this is, by the way, why I do a movie. I could have interviewed Richard Spencer, run the transcript. You could read it. You could be like, wow, that's interesting. But what's crushing in the movie, and I don't remember if this was in your section that you watched, because you saw 60 minutes of the movie. The movie is 100 minutes long, so there's 40 minutes you haven't seen. But in a critical point in the movie, I'm sitting with Richard Spencer, the poster boy of white nationalism, and I ask him questions one after the other, and it becomes blindingly obvious to the viewer that this guy's a left-winger. He's not a right-winger. He hates Reagan. He doesn't like the founders. He doesn't believe in the Bill of Rights. He doesn't believe that we get our rights from God. He believes we get them from the state. He wants to see a bigger state. He wants national health care. And on it goes. His favorite presidents are all Democrats. And I go, what do you think of the movie Birth of a Nation, the racist pro-Ku Klux Klan movie? He goes, loves it, loves it. He's a Woodrow Wilson progressive leftist masquerading as a Trumpster. So this is what I do. I blow the whistle on all this to show that the public narratives that we've been told, that we believe, I believe, when I look into them, they're false. They're lies. And they're deliberate lies. The press knew that Jason Kessler was a leftist, but they did no articles on him. They did no investigation of his background. Just as when Kavanaugh came up, look at it. They're checking out Kavanaugh's Facebook. They don't check out the accuser's Facebook. She scrubbed all her social media. The press will say, and someone said earlier about narrative, he said, she said. This was not a he said, she said case. Because he said, she said is when a cop goes into a domestic violence. He said, she said. You don't know either one. Either could be lying. This is more like somebody claims that Albert Einstein lied about his equations. Now, Albert Einstein's a public figure. Hundreds of people have testified to the fact that he's to his intellectual integrity, to his personal integrity. The accuser is a complete unknown. So it's not he said, she said. It is an accusation of two people of completely different public credibility. That was the Kavanaugh case, but by framing it as he said, she said, it's kind of like, wow, either one of them could be equally likely to be making the whole thing up. Not true. Fake narrative, fake news.
Okay. My second question is, so many people are like pressed about the history of things, but that doesn't like negate the fact that people are doing offensive and hurtful things now, like, Democratic slave owners or like, especially with the Confederate flag, considering that that was, you know, like, used for the South typically. So, like, many of the people who, like, fly the Confederate flags are considered Republican, so, like, and they somehow use the history of it to justify why they fly it. So, like, why do people use the history of things to justify it when it could be, like, wrong or whatever?
I think if we actually knew history, we would be less likely to misread these symbols. So take, for example, the majority of monuments knocked down in the South are not Confederate generals. They are the nameless Confederate soldier, right? Monuments erected after the Civil War. Now, the nameless Confederate soldier was typically a dirt poor farmer or a laborer. This guy did not own any slaves.
5% of Southerners own slaves. We're rich, we're wealthy enough to own slaves.
That's right. So the typical Confederate guy was, in fact, a Confederate soldier was once asked, why did you fight in the Civil War? And his answer was, because the Yankees are down here. That was his answer. It's a guy fighting to defend the only way of life he knows. So here's my point. You can hate that guy. He was on the wrong side. I agree. But don't be conned into thinking that this is the bad guy that you have to go after. The bad guys have all gone without accountability. The biggest bad guy was John C. Calhoun, who was, in a sense, the inventor of the idea that slavery is a positive good. But then I would add all these Northern Democrats, one on top of the other. Lincoln was onto this completely. And one of the reasons we don't study Lincoln enough is because he blows the whistle on the Democratic Party. And that part of Lincoln is suppressed, and the left pretends like Lincoln was some sort of a liberal. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Thank you for coming today. My name's Jimmy, and my question is this. How does third wave feminism today have to do with the method to undermine America and rewrite history?
Well, this is not quite my area. I would just say this, that I think that the idea that we should believe the victim is an idea that has now become very controversial, and rightly so. I mean, just look, 2 days ago, a victim confessed that she made the whole thing up. I never met Kavanaugh, she says. I only said this to get him. Now, what was she doing? She was corroborating Susan Ford. And we're living at a time where we've allowed our ideological instincts to sanction very dubious methods of corroboration. Susan Ford goes, well, I told my husband about it 3 years ago, and that's corroborate. That's not corroboration. You told him. Corroboration means some independent verification. There were other people there. Can they corroborate? So,
And that was right after Kavanaugh was mentioned as a potential Supreme Court nominee in the future.
well, leave aside the timing, all of it. But so I think what's going on is what we really saw with Kavanaugh, in my opinion, is an attempted political assassination. An attempt to orchestrate a hit on a man known to be innocent, carried out by extremely powerful, ruthless people. It's not even Susan Ford who's to blame. It's all the people who put this whole thing into place. The media, the Democrats on the committee. Without these people working in a coordinated way, it would never work. Imagine if someone on our side made an accusation. It would go nowhere. Why? Because the media wouldn't cover it. People made accusations against Obama. There was a guy who had a press conference and said, I had a sexual relationship with Obama. Do you hear about it? No. Press refused to report it. What about Me Too?
How's it going? My name's Nate, and my question is, how can you apply the idea of the left being entitled to the South and the Democrats of the time of Lincoln's election?
Because the Democrats in the South had the view that elections don't really matter. In other words, people debate the Civil War, and there's a reasonable debate about the complex set of causes, including slavery, that caused the war. But here's a simple way to understand the Civil War. An outsider, a Republican, Lincoln, wins a close election in which the Democrats had been divided. They had two candidates, Breckinridge in the South and Douglas in the North. So Lincoln squeaks in there, and all hell breaks loose. And in the North, Democrats are calling for Lincoln's assassination, which happens later, and the Southern Democrats go, no way, we're ready to break up the country rather than live with the outcome. So look at the eerie parallels between 1860 and today. An outsider, Trump, elected in a close election, unexpected to some degree. All hell has broken loose. We haven't had normal American politics for 2 years. And of course, they're not breaking up the country, but all of this craziness that we're seeing is the response to the unwillingness to accept the outcome of a democratic election.
Thanks. Good morning. So thank you for coming. On September 14th, the Dallas Morning News reported that the Texas State Board of Education, which not completely, but is significantly in charge of creating curriculum for K through 12 for the entire United States public school system, had chosen to remove Hillary Clinton from the history textbooks completely. How does this fit into this idea of covering the past so that mistakes aren't made, and what should we as citizens be doing to look forward and prevent this sort of lapse of history from occurring?
I don't know the situation very closely about this, but I will say this. Obviously, if one is giving a full account of American history, you can't leave anybody out. Now, Hillary Clinton obviously wasn't president, but she was a very important player. If I wrote a history, she would have a prominent place. Remember that our history, particularly at the school level, is a highly distilled, simplified miniature of actual history. In fact, when I talk to students, what I'm really amazed at is that they think of American history kind of like this. There was a founding created by some very flawed bad guys. Then we fast forward to the Civil War, in which Abraham Lincoln, a progressive, overthrew slavery, after which we fast forward to Rosa Parks, who wouldn't sit in the back of the bus. So the LBJ led the glorious Democratic Party in support of civil rights, and everything else is left out. And if you were to say things like, like I'm an immigrant, to me the most interesting question of American history is this: how did a country which was once maybe one of the poorest countries in the world, circa 1800, become in about 60 years the richest country in the world with the biggest GNP, and that magnetically draws immigrants to this day? How did that happen? Who made America rich? Notice that question is not even touched, as if it's not even important. And yet for immigrants who come, that's the life we're looking for, a chance to make our own destiny. And if you don't answer that question, you're not telling us what makes America different. You're just repeating the same mantra that is of interest to you. So I call that parochial history. Progressive history is ultimately a very sanitized version of true history, and I'm trying to open up the doors.
Thank you.
Hi, Dinesh. My name is Brant Ebright. It's really good to have you here. Why is society more accepting to leftist manipulation versus the truth of conservatism?
I attribute it ultimately to two things. One is the pure propaganda vehicles of the left. Because, as I said, when things seem to be confirmed from 5 different directions, look, here's a very educated man who until very recently believed, hey, the South is guilty for the sin of slavery. Why? Because that's been drummed into us since we were kids. And so to free your mind from that is very difficult. It's very difficult to change your assumptions. It's only when you are faced with the crushing fact that you have to rethink. I put a crushing fact in the movie Hillary's America. I basically said this. Because whenever I'd speak on campus about slavery, some professor would go, well, Dinesh, this is a very simplistic account. You're missing the fact there's plenty of blame to go around. This is when the left is on the defensive, they emit this familiar squid-like cloud of rhetoric. Blame everybody. And this is when I kind of excel. So what I said was, okay, in 1860, the year before the Civil War, no Republican owned a slave. Now, not no Republican leader owned a slave, no Republican in the United States owned a slave. And what's so crushing about this is it takes a single counterexample to prove me wrong. But to this date, as I'm sitting here, not one valid counterexample has surfaced, which tells me, think about this. Were you ever taught this? Did you learn this in school? Never. The left has suppressed it. They act as if this was an American crime, but no. There were bad guys called Democrats who did it. There were good guys called Republicans who fought them. This fact is camouflaged in progressive historiography, which is the history we all know to be true. Ha ha.
Thank you.
And to your point earlier about what made America great and made America so wealthy, they never talk about free enterprise. They never talk about the Judeo-Christian ethic, the way Americans behave themselves. There was nothing like the corruption you see in other countries. It's what's held them back economically. You never hear about just freedom, general freedom that made America so wealthy. And then the Industrial Revolution, all the inventions that came out of America, all the bright ideas. My life was changed by an entrepreneur's invention that fixed my heart this fall. It's all been that type of freedom, lack of government intervention. In 1860, the average American, the only contact they ever had with the federal government was the post office. That was the only time they ever saw any sign of the federal government. So anyway, that's, I just wanted to say that earlier, but that's something you'll never see in a liberal textbook. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Alex. Just want to thank you for coming. I'm a really big fan. How do you feel about multiculturalism, and how do you think the left has been able to use that to push their agenda?
The core idea of multiculturalism is that all cultures are basically equal. No culture is better or worse, superior or inferior to any other. I've written a lot about multiculturalism, and I don't want to dive into it in depth, but here's one thing I will say, that when I heard that in college, the core doctrine of multiculturalism, intuitively I knew it was false. And the reason I knew it is because I'm an immigrant. Now, think about what an immigrant is doing. I'm not talking about a refugee. I'm talking about an immigrant who chooses to leave his country, which is to say to vote with your feet. And you're voting with your feet against something that is near and dear to you, your family, your friends, your neighborhood, everything that's familiar to you, which you inherently are biased toward. So why would an immigrant ever do that and literally march to another country if you didn't think deep down that this country is better, it's going to give me a better life, I'll be able to do things in this country that I couldn't possibly imagine if I stayed where I am. So the immigrant is a walking refutation of cultural relativism. So now you might say, well, you got all these immigrants coming, how come they don't see that? The reason they don't see that is that the immigrant is also eager to assimilate. So when immigrants come to campus, their professors browbeat them with this leftist ideology, and they're so eager to become Americans, they're like, I got to assimilate, and they assimilate to the liberal culture that they now find themselves in. And that's why you've got all these Asian Americans who are conservative. Their actual values are to the right of Pat Robertson and Liberty University, but they vote Democratic because they have assimilated to the perverse political culture of the academic left.
One more.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Libby. I noticed that the title of your film and book, Death of a Nation, was very similar to the 1915 film Birth of a Nation. I was just wondering if you could tell us why you named your book and your film that, and how they both relate.
This is a good question. Yes, Death of a Nation is definitely a reference, you might say, to Birth of a Nation. Let's think for a moment about why they called that movie Birth of a Nation. Essentially, the progressive Democrats, led by Woodrow Wilson, believed that the founders got it all wrong. Woodrow Wilson, by the way, was the first American president to openly attack the founders. That no president before did that. Wilson basically said the founders were antiquated. They were farmers of a different time. We have to start America all over again on the progressive principle. And if you think of what they mean by progress, moving away from the founding. That's the meaning of progress. Now, today, young people don't know that. They think, well, I'm a progressive, I want progress. Well, everybody wants progress. The debate is over what does progress mean, and in what direction do you achieve progress. But the progressives, again, very careful to capture this word, saw it as we're starting America all over again, and our core principle, the defining principle of the Progressive Democratic Party is bigotry. Stunning to think about. That's how they saw it. That's why the cabinet cheered wildly when Woodrow Wilson showed the movie in which the Ku Klux Klan rides to the rescue. Now, again, notice how this is covered up. Today, some leftists will go, what about David Duke? Why? Because the single exception is being deceitfully put forward to overturn the rule. If you made a list of all the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan from the 1860s to the present, every local leader, every grand dragon, every grand wizard, make a list of all of them and stick their party affiliation next to it, 99% of them will be Democrats. That is the rule, but the rule is hidden by finding one guy and pointing at him, look, look, look. And so that's what I'm getting at. So Death of a Nation is intended to say that if the progressive birth of a nation principle is allowed to play itself out, it will kill America. The death of the nation is the implementation of the full progressive ideology, repudiating that ideology and replacing it with the original principles of the American founding. Not principles replaced in their original form. No one's saying that we're going to implement those principles as the founders did in the 1780s. They have to be applied to today. But it's those same enduring principles that will be the salvation of America. That's the theme of the movie.
Thank you.
You've got to watch the movie called Free State. You ever heard of that?
I have.
It's on Netflix right now. We watched it the other night, and it was so incredible. It shows how the Democrats, a group of Confederate soldiers broke off and formed their own country in southeastern Mississippi. And it was blacks, whites, the whole, just everybody. And when they went in to vote, because they defeated some Confederate divisions in war. When they went in to vote, they had to pull their guns out to get the Democrats to let them vote. And they put in a bunch of Republican ballots. And then when the count came out, it was 492 to 2. And so, Democrats over Republicans. So that's how oppressive it was. And they had laws in the South, even after the Civil War in Mississippi. What was it called? It was called apprenticeship laws, where you could buy somebody as an apprentice, and they had to. It was just a way to keep slavery going. Anyway, it's a great movie. It's the most true to history I've seen come out of Hollywood in a long time.
The good thing is the truth is starting.
Matthew McConaughey. That's why my wife wanted to watch it, because he was the star of it.
The truth is starting to break out, and people are beginning to figure out that the first step is always realizing that you're being sold a bill of goods. That's the first step, because if you don't see that, you're going to remain a sucker. But when you see that, that's the first step into saying, okay, well, that's not right, so what are the facts? And I think my presence here will be useful if I simply say to you at the end of the day, become a true skeptic. Become a skeptic about progressivism itself. Interrogate its assumptions. The reason history matters is that history is used as a weapon today. All the sins of the past, the left is trying to pin on the Republican Party. And this is the point of the big switch. The point of the big switch is we may have been the bad guys, but the whole baggage of all the stuff we did, we're now going to get to saddle on the other guys who never did it and fought us. But we can make the good guys into the bad guys. We traded platforms, and the whole conversion of LBJ. This is a guy who would use the word nigger after he signed the Civil Rights Act. And this is documented again and again and again by Robert Carroll, by Doris Kearns Goodwin, by innumerable sources, but suppressed in progressive historiography. My wife went to Texas State. I go over there, LBJ Library, LBJ Street, LBJ this, LBJ that, and not a soul walking on that campus knows that this guy was a deep-rooted bigot till the day he died. He never switched. He never changed any more than the Democratic Party changed, but it's a convenient narrative to serve their purpose. And so be a free thinker in the true sense of the term, and ultimately that'll make you what I sometimes call, half-jokingly, a very dangerous American. Because when you're equipped with facts, you become dangerous. The reason ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, CNN will never mention my movies is because they don't dare to put me on. If they want to have a debate and they put me on, I'll unleash these kinds of facts and they'll be like, They don't want that. So, as a result, let's pretend that there's no movie in the theater, even though it's in 1,000 theaters.
Thank you so much, Dinesh.
Let's also thank President Falwell for moderating this. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Both the DVD and the book, Death of a Nation, will be available.
How many universities in the country do you think would allow this conversation right now? 1%?
Just to give you an example, Debbie and I were at Michigan State just last week, and as I started speaking, a student stands up and starts using the F word and screaming at the top of his lungs, and he did this for almost 10 minutes, just disrupting the whole audience. I couldn't even say a word until the security was even reluctant to intervene. Their theory was, he's not harming anybody, he isn't punching anybody. Yes, but he is crushing free speech at a state university, a constitutional right being suppressed by a heckler. This is the face of modern progressivism, so it's a sad reality.
When my father spoke at Dartmouth in the 80s, it was a little bit of booing and hissing, but it was nothing like it is now, and it's just a shame. We've lost academic freedom, we've lost freedom of expression. I don't know how they learn when they can't discuss but one side. 96% of Ivy League faculty and staff donated to the Obama administration. And even Mayor Bloomberg chastised Harvard for that in his commencement speech a few years ago. But go ahead, David.
Thank you. Hey, so obviously the book and this DVD are both available in the lobby. We've discounted the price for you. Dinesh will be there. Wants to meet you, take a picture if you want, sign a book, make a comment. Obviously, it'd be a great gift for someone that you think would find it interesting. Also, we want to thank our good friends from YAF who partnered with us in this. We wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that we do and have some of the guests that we get to have without their great partnership with us, so we're thankful to them. Thanks again. Come out in the lobby, wait a few seconds, and Dinesh will be there. Hopefully Debbie will be out with him as well. Can we thank Debbie for making her way here as well? Great job. Thank you.
Great job. That was awesome.
You're dismissed.